Do you want to ask any questions before I blather on?
No, other than the year was 77. And when did you meet? You worked with Mike Metzger. Did you meet Barris initially, or was that later?
No, Mike hired me. What was interesting at the first meeting, which was at 1313 Vine Street, where Chuck had produced Dating Game and Newlywed Game in the 60s and up to the 70s. Now, Newlywed Game had been on, I believe, in 1974. Now, this was only 77, but 3 years, oddly enough, in TV is a lot of time to go by. But no, I started work. There were only 3 people working there, and the Gong Show was in full swing and full production, and half of the office space at 1313 was set aside for the Gong Show people. And they had about 8 contestant coordinators bringing in people. And Chuck would go, I mean, I did meet him briefly, but it was more of a Mike bringing me in. Hi, Chuck, this is David Greenfield. He's going to be working on the show. Hi, nice to meet you. And that was it. We didn't really have a conversation at that point. We got to know each other later because Chuck, which I guess most people don't know, he loved going to the Gong Show interviews. As many producers as he had, he would go to the interviews themselves, the auditions, I should say, not interviews. And he loved handpicking it because, Gong Show at that point was on 7 days a week, and 5 days a week, plus was on nighttime. Gary Owens was at that point was doing the nighttime version. Chuck was hosting the daytime version. And so I had very little to do with them. We started to bring in more contestant coordinators, but since I was the first one in, I was like head contestant coordinator. So the problem was nobody knew the show was coming back. We had no contestant pool whatsoever. So
Newlywed Game.
Thank you. Yes. And even though the show had been on in 74, that didn't mean anything. Nobody was calling, and we couldn't afford, if you took an ad out of the paper, nobody's going to see the ad. You'd have to take like a full page ad out, and Chuck wasn't willing to do that. So we went to the bridal registry in downtown LA. We'd get lists of people that were getting married or had recently gotten married, and we would cold call. And I would do voice. We were doing this all day long. And, so I do voices. I would do Ringo Starr. Come down 1313 Boyne Street in Hollywood. You'll have a lovely and we do anything and everything to get these people in because we were concerned about our jobs. There were 5 or maybe even 6 of us at that point. And whoever booked the most amount of people would stay on. And luckily, that was always me. So we would book these sheets and we would overbook. I mean, every half hour, we'd book literally like 20 people. And there were long days. And we started out initially just booking and booking and booking. And now it became time to actually bring people in. We moved over because we had to. We didn't have enough space to do massive interviews for the Newlywed Game because Gong Show was taking up all the space at 1313 Vine. So we moved to a much bigger building, 6430 Sunset. The reason I mention it is we were on the 2nd floor, and on the 10th floor, there was a company called Goodson Todman, which you may have heard of. And there was no jealousy per se, but we only had the Gong Show on, and we were starting the Newlywed Game. Whereas up on the 10th floor, they had Match Game. They had To Tell the Truth. They had, I mean, all the. I'm drawing a blank on
Family Feud.
Feud was on. Beat the Clock might have even been on for a time. But anyway, they had a plethora of shows, and we didn't. But they were all white shirts and ties, and we were all hippies, and Chuck prided himself because I was starting to get to know Chuck because he would come down and he would hang out because during the course of the day, again, because there were such long days, Mike Metzger, Ellen Metzger, and I, we loved playing guitar and singing, and I started bringing my guitar in. We would spend about an hour a day just to get away from the phones, and we would play music. And Chuck likewise. Chuck always played guitar, and he loved, he wrote the song Palisades Park, if you're familiar with that. Chuck was a very diversified guy, and just a remarkable man. People that watched him on the Gong Show probably thought, or saw Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, that he was a crazy man, or that but Chuck, more on the quiet side, and just a good heart, lovely guy, and very good to me, as you will see. Yeah, every time we got in the elevator with those 10th floor Goodson Todman guys, we looked over at them, and they look over at us, and we were the hippies, dope smoking hippies with the long hair, and they all had short hair. I got to work with a lot of those guys later on, but Goodson Todman was huge. And although Chuck Barris had been successful in the 60s, we did not have the wealth of shows that they did, but we would. So now it's time to start interviewing the couples that we booked. And it was decided upon that I would do the initial briefing. And not that they didn't know how to play the game, but most of them didn't. The show hadn't been on the air. So the first briefings were more informational. This is how the show works, etc. Luckily, in a way, during the course of this, Larry Goddard was hired for the show. Now, Larry Goddard was Chuck's godson, and Mike Metzger came over. He said, "Look, David, this kid's only out here for the summer. Okay, it's Chuck's godson. We got to be good to him. I want you to take him under your wing, and he's your responsibility." It's like, okay, thanks. And I was very nice to him. He was a real sports guy, and I wasn't. He was a little geeky, and which turned out to be he wasn't, but that's the way he came across initially, because he changed. He like me, just came out of college, didn't know anything about the entertainment business, and to make a long story still too long, we decided to make him the opening briefing. Okay, so I had an opening act. Larry would just explain the rules very straight. This is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do, okay? And then they would come into my room, and I would do a 20-minute briefing, and I would, I'd start off, I'd walk into the room, okay, and there'd be like 15 to 20 people. I would always start off by hey, hi, how you doing? Not real high energy, but hi, how you doing? Oh, fine. And I'd look at them and say, oh, Christ.
You literally say that and do that.
Oh, yeah. And I'd walk out of the room. Okay. Then I'd walk back in, and I do, hi, how y'all doing? They go, great. I said, good. Okay. You're on a TV show, for God's sakes. Okay. Let's get something going. What do you do? And I would, again, the big personality that I created on radio became bigger because I had to get these, not shell shock so much, but, people were not, they're not used to being on TV. And, I explained to them, I said, the more you talk, the more likely you're going to be on the show. Okay. And I had all sorts of catchphrases, which always worked. And I would, just hit him over the head with things. Honesty equals points. Honesty equals points. If you go in there and you tell stories, okay, just tell the truth. The first thing that comes to your head, that's the only way you're going to be able to match. Okay, because if you think about it, where is the weirdest place you made love? Boom. Or made whoopee. Sorry, I use the word love. Okay. Where's the oddest place you ever thought about making love? Okay. First thing that comes to your head will chances are that'll be the first thing that comes into your husband or your wife's head. Okay. So go with that, because if you're thinking about it too much, you're never going to match. You'll say, well, then there's that. So go with your first answer all the time, which is how we got some crazy answers on the show, because again, I would hit on that forever. But
describe the format of Newlywed Game.
I'm sorry?
Describe the format of the show.
The format of the show? People don't know.
Maybe not for someone listening who doesn't know.
Okay, well, it was hosted by Bob Eubanks, and we had 4 couples, and the object was to match your wife or husband's answers. Okay, we would bring the husbands out first. Well, you want the format. We would bring they'd come out, we'd introduce them all. We would take the ladies off to an isolation booth, which I'll get to later, and we'd ask the husbands questions in order. And what people don't know, and nobody's ever asked, is, gee, how'd you get those answers down on cards so fast? We had 6 cue card people for the show. Okay, I'm moving forward about the show because we had 1 cue card person for each person that was on the show. So when you answer a question, Joshua, that your cue card person is writing the answer down on the cue card. Then he flips it over. Okay, wait, second person, second cue card, et cetera, et cetera. So we get through the questions. And if Bob got a great answer or an interesting answer or a laugh answer, Bob was always smart enough, and we'll get into this, to hold off on getting too into that situation because it'd be more interesting when the wife comes back. So the format, we'd ask the guys questions, and then we bring the wives back, and the wives would attempt to match answers. Again, the guys had all the answers that the cue card people had on their cards, and they would hold up, the girl would answer, are there more uphills or downhills in your neighborhood? Your husband said downhills, and I'm sorry, you say down.
You said uphills.
I'll have to say uphills, okay? Your husband said there are more downhills in your neighborhood. What? Honey, where do you live? Don't you live in the same place as me? And that's the way the show works. And then, but again, there's much more to it than that when we get to the actual production of the show. But that was it. But they were playing for a grand prize that was chosen especially for them. And that's why anybody comes in for a game show, usually, not so on Dating Game when we get there. But these people were all, they weren't rich. They, were newlyweds and, just starting out in life. And we were not giving away great prizes. We would not be, we weren't taping yet. But, we give away bedroom sets, living room sets, pianos, nothing,
Nothing extravagant.
Nothing. I mean, you get a TV set, but they were the old TVs that were, if you remember, well, you remember, but they were furniture. TVs back then were furniture. And, even earlier, they were gigantic pieces of furniture, which you would put things on and put your records in and such, all that. But they didn't cost that much. But anyway, that's what they were playing for. Anyway, second round, we would do the same thing. We would take the husbands off, okay, and ask the wives question. Then we'd bring the guys back. We'd see if they'd match, and we would declare a winner. First round was worth 5 points. Second round was worth 10 points. And then we had a 25-point bonus question, which, of course, would always determine the
Outcome.
The winner, yeah, because again, they get a few 5-point questions right. Maybe they get 2 10-point questions, but generally, the 25-pointer, because it was so much more, they would win. And that was done purposely because, we wanted somebody with a decent score. So that was the format. So going back to the interviews, my job was to really get them up to my standard of energy. Okay. I mean, and really that's all. Not all, but the energy level that I possess, which hopefully comes across, is what I needed from them. They can't be sitting there and well, Bob, we went on our honeymoon, Rochester, New York, and it was really great. We kissed and did other stuff. It was neat. I mean, that's not going to fly. These people you had to be loud, okay. I remember LNC, loud and clear, and again, honesty equals points. Discuss your answers. Talk about your answers. And what if we don't know what to talk about? And there were two catchphrases, I'll call them, that would always work. And I've used them on every relationship show I ever did. One was the simple word because. Okay. Don't, when you answer the question, what was the most romantic gift you ever gave your husband? Whatever the answer is, okay. Because that's what he always wants. Because, and a kid show I did called I'm Telling, there was one kid who just kept saying because over and over again, because she couldn't think of any answer after the because. But the other thing that got him going, and this really saved me in the studio, saved them, in the isolation booth, and likewise even in the interviews, I'd say, look, if you don't match answers, okay, all you got to do is turn to your husband or your wife and say, why did you say that? Okay, now you don't have to do the because, okay, you're putting it on your husband, you're putting it on your wife. Why did you say? I said it because that's what it was. No, it wasn't. It was, and that started the argument. It was as simple as that. Why'd you say that? And that got me through over 500 episodes of the Newlywed Game ultimately. But, that's what we did in the interviews. I would get him to that point because I wanted to get him on the show. So from my room, and again, I took 20 minutes. Sometimes it would take longer. And Mike Metzger, Steve Friedman, who got creative consultant on the show. Let me explain that briefly. In TV land, a lot of shows are not Writers Guild. Okay, the Writers Guild, which I've been a member of for years and years and years. Not every game show was
Union.
Thank you. Yeah. Why don't you do the interview yourself? Yes.
Okay, well, I was born in 1991.
Yeah, they were purposely not union because they didn't want to pay us residuals. So, for example, Steve Friedman, who wrote, I would say, a good half of the questions for a season with Mike, they go into their office, they write. He got a creative consultant credit, okay? And creative consultant simply meant writer, but the Writers Guild didn't know that. And I always felt bad for Steve because he really did produce a show with Mike, and it should have been produced by Mike Metzger, excuse me, and Steve Friedman. But Steve always got the creative consultant, and that's the way a lot of shows got away with it. Or you'll see a lot of shows, and some that I did, where you'll watch The Crawl and you'll say, nobody wrote that show. What's the deal? And they would just leave the writer's credit out. So we go from my briefing, I'd bring him in, I'd introduce him, and we would do a mock version of the game. Usually a guy named Tony McClay would come in and play Bob Eubanks, and we would interview and play the game and make notes and such. And the way Chuck Barris worked, not Chuck wasn't there, but the way the company worked was because the room was kind of tight, we had to come up with codes. If you were on the show, we'd give you an 86 plus. That way, when they left the room, if they looked, it's like, oh, I don't know what that means. Probably didn't get on the show. So, and if you got 86 plus, that meant you were great and incredible. You'd really make it on the show. And then we had other little acronyms, CBF could be funny. There were many more. LNC, loud and clear, things like that. But, we were looking for talkers and people. What we didn't do, we would occasionally, luckily, get contestants that were really not only chatty, but very willing to reveal things about their personal life. And as soon as they started doing that, we would stop them because we wanted to hold it for the show. And we knew we always knew when we had gold in those meetings. I would generally stay, even though I was backed up. Larry's doing the pre-interview interview, but if there was a great couple and I'd say, oh, I think these guys are going to, I'd watch them and, we'd make notes and I'd run and then I'd go back to the, say, hi, how you doing? Walk out again. Hey, how you doing? And I would start that again. I mean, I varied it over the years, but it was like, doing a comedy routine. You would do it. And then based on their answers, you'd come, oh yeah, and a lot of that. And I'd also purposely flirt with the wives for several reasons. One was they're newlyweds and they weren't really used to being flirted with because they were, and secondly, the guys, because I was young and okay looking, would get a little pissed off at me, which is what we wanted. We wanted the show only works with friction. If everybody's happy and they're all matching, there's no TV show. But if there's a little friction in there and, oh, he's cute, that worked for the show. And and so we did that. There were long days, because we'd book all day, play a little bit of guitar. Then around 5 o'clock, we'd go upstairs, where we do the interviews till sometimes 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night. And then, go home. And we'd shoot on weekends, usually Saturdays and Sundays. So that was our life for Newlywed Game. And it was explained, just getting serious for a moment, somewhere in the process, Bud Granoff was Chuck's business guy. And Bud called us in because I didn't know anything about the business per se. I mean, I knew about network TV and I understood now there was cable TV, but there was something called syndication. And I had lunch with Bob Bowden yesterday. Bob Bowden, who's also known as TV Bob, perhaps the most well-versed person in game shows, knows more about game shows than anybody else. He was vice president of CBS, vice president of ABC. He's done everything on both sides of the camera. I asked him yesterday, I said, I'm pretty sure Newlywed Game were the first strip show, were we not? And he said, it was you or Joker's Wild. He said, no, Joker's Wild came after us. I said, yeah, you guys were the first. What a strip show is, no, it's not what you think. It just means simply that you're on 5 days a week. And instead of network shows where you'd be on, say, 8 o'clock every night, we would be on different markets in different cities. But what Bud explained to me, which really has stayed with me all these years, was because Chuck was laying out the money for the Newlywed Game, because we didn't have a show yet to syndicate. We didn't have a syndicator in place because they wanted to see the show first. So Chuck laid out the money. Bud explained to us that if we cleared just New York and LA, if we were just on in those two markets, we could afford to do all 175 shows. That's 39 weeks of shows. Just those two markets. And it's like, wow, well, I hope we do. Well, sure as shit, we cleared the entire country and we were immediately a hit, because with the syndicated version of the show, we didn't have compliance and practices or broadcast standards. Whereas if you watch Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, or you know anything about Chuck Barris, he got pretty beat up by ABC in the 60s because the show was a little too sexy for network TV, and he'd have to bring it back down. Whereas now in 1977, we were told by Chuck to push the envelope, not push the envelope, shove the envelope. We could get away with literally anything. More so, excuse me, on the dating game when that got picked up. So that was the first season of Newlywed Game, and it was great. I met Bob Eubanks, got along with him terrifically, and we shot. Am I going too fast, or am I running over anything?
I think I think we're right on track.
All right. So yeah, I mean, when the interviews were all over at the end of the night, we would always confer on, again, how we did, what we had to look more for, always ethnicities. It was so tough. We didn't want to be the whitest show on TV, but it just was tough. We're looking for African Americans, we're looking for Asians, we're looking for anything other than, just these white folks coming in from Orange County or LA County. And again, like I said earlier, it was all cold calls. And we did, this was kind of interesting. I'll just go back for a second. We finally got Chuck to put on a couple of commercials for us, just 30-second ads, and we would be told when they'd be on. So we'd go home, and then let's say it's on, this prior to producing the show. I'm going back for a second.
You're just an assistant at this point.
Yeah. And let's say 10:35 at night, the ad was going to be on. Okay. So we all come from our homes, everybody, entire staff. Chuck Barris was closed. We turn the lights on. 10:34, deathly silence. 10:35, all the phones would light up, and all the hi, Andrew, yeah, we got a time opening, and that's how luckily we got many more bookings for the show were just from those ads. After that, it was more word of mouth, and once we were on the air, of course, then it was a lot easier to get people. But we did go on the air prior to producing all 175 shows, which was a lot of shows. All right, so going on to the production, again, I met Bob Eubanks, and I was moved from contestant coordinator to on-stage briefer and production associate, which are kind of made up titles. But my job was to set Bob's podium, which was simple. I don't know if you noticed, excuse me, on Newlywed Game, we didn't have name tags. Most game shows have name tags. We didn't. Bob must have been a genius or clairvoyant, but I would put Polaroids on his podium with the names, and it would be guy, girl, and then in between rounds, I would switch them. It was girl, guy. I'd have their names written down. Likewise, I would place Bob's cards, double and triple check his question cards, make sure they were all in order. Each show, I'd hand the old show questions back to Mike Metzger. And Bob never knew what to do with his hands, like most hosts, because he had to stand there for 5 shows, for God's sakes. So one of my jobs in between was he would take a paper clip, and not a little paper clip, but the bigger paper clips, and he would mangle just under the podium, would mangle this paper clip. It was unbelievable, because you wouldn't see him doing it. There was no movement to it. But during the commercial break, when I switched over to the Polaroids, I'd take away the mangled paper clip, and I'd give him a new paper clip. So I did that for ultimately 525 shows. So first season, now very first show, I take the girls off to the isolation booth. Nobody really ever asked me about the isolation booth. It was yellow. It had wire mesh on the outside and the inside. I don't know why. I guess it was to keep the cushioning intact. It was about 10 feet wide by about 5 feet. And it was literally 5 or 6 feet off stage. You'd walk down the steps and it's right there. Okay, we close the door, and so I bring the girls in. There were just 5 chairs in there, and that's about all you could fit. We were 5 people, and so I put the girls in there, and I'd be in there. I close the door. I wouldn't hear the first round of the show. I would have no idea what Bob was asking, except that I was privy to the questions ahead of time, but I didn't know what the answers were going to be, and I could remember all the questions, but that wasn't my job. My job was to keep the girls interested, remind them, again, why'd you say that? And I said, and I would do things like, girls, this is what I would do.
And you would say that word?
Oh, girls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah. But, occasionally I would walk out for a second, not really pay attention and come back. Oh my God, you cannot believe what your husbands are saying. What? Tell me. I can't tell you what they're saying. I said, but you better go out there and tell the truth, okay? Because they certainly are, okay? Honesty equals point. You got to, and again, they said, well, I'm nervous. I said, remember, okay, your out is always, honey, why'd you say that? And again, that always put them at ease. So I'd be flirting with them because, again, they were all newlyweds. And like I just said, they weren't used to a guy flirting with them. And to the point where, I put my arm around them, or I'd hold hands with one, or whatever the case. And that was it. And then it was time, bring the girls back on stage. Had to be very careful because the guys had to keep their cards, which had been handed out, cue cards down on their laps, and they'd always.
What happens if they pull it up early? I always wondered. And then what?
They didn't, because
Really?
again, I would say top card only, top card only, top card only. Nobody ever, if they,
Wow.
yeah, I know, I got lucky, that's all. Sometimes they would drop all the cards, but they would all be face down. But again, what you don't know is for all the shows, as soon as I came out, now I got both couples outside, no reason for me to be in the isolation booth. I'm standing in between camera 2 and 3 because Newlywed Game, the way they're situated, John the Fox Dorsey is shooting them, and he's shooting them from the waist up. But there was no blocker panel between the couples. So you could nudge, if it was a multiple choice question, you'd nudge them with your foot, or you could have any kind of code. If they give us a multiple choice, we'll go alphabetically, the first letter or the last letter or whatever. I mean, we had to think about that stuff. And did anybody cheat on the Newlywed Game? Yeah, a couple tried, but nobody ever got away with it. We go over, we give them warnings. In my memory, in 525 shows, I think we always had a backup couple. We would always book 5 couples, and generally, if everybody showed up, we would. If sometimes we would keep a couple, but more times than not, we'd get rid of them. But I only remember replacing 1 couple. There were probably more, but in my memory, I only remember replacing 1. So yeah, the shows went off fine. What we loved to do was in between times, commercial breaks. And Bob Eubanks, I've worked with many hosts. Bob did this better and more than anybody else. He was constantly aware that the studio audience was part and parcel of the show, and their reactions were important to the show. But Bob would do jokes. I don't know, how does Josh's wife tease her hair? They would be that stupid, and Bob would set me out. David, how's your wife's schnauzer? Which is a dog. Just ridiculous things. And Bob, myself, Johnny Jacobs, our announcer, we would keep the audience entertained. And likewise, the couples who I'm still eyeing at the same time, we're doing jokes, but I'm watching them to make sure they're not talking. But you could do 3 things at once. I was 23 years old, for God's sake. But Bob really, hats off to him. Yep, hats off. He was an entertainer, and he loved the audience. He loved the feedback. Whereas many hosts during the commercial break, there was no audience. They would deal with the producers and stuff like that. So yeah, the shows would work, and we'd have 15-minute turnarounds because we didn't have to change the set. We would change the
between episode filmings.
Between episodes, I'm sorry. Yes, we would change the prize, but not all the time. And for those that wonder if they remember the show and they watch the show, after the bonus round, you won! Applause, applause. And here's the prize chosen especially for you. It's a brand new piano. Christ, we got a 1-room apartment. What am I going to do with an apartment? I just got to do anyway. So they get excited. How do we do that? Well, we didn't bring the prize out especially. Part of the process as we're putting couples together was when they first came in, they'd have about a list of 20 prizes, and they would circle the 3 that they most wanted. So as part of the putting together of the shows, strong wife, strong husband, funny wife, odd husband, you know what I'm saying? You wouldn't want it would never be all funny people or all odd people. We would sprinkle. And because we interviewed so many people, we were able to do that. But this is perhaps the most fascinating fact, I think, about the Newlywed Game is that, and Steve Friedman figured this out, our percentage rate was out of every 18 couples that we interviewed, and we interviewed a lot.
Hundreds, thousands.
Yes, thousands.
Okay.
1 out of every 18 couples was our ratio that made it on the show. 1 out of every 18. And the other 17 had no use for them. But that's how tough it was. to get the class of people. And that's why I think, our shows, meaning the shows that ran from 77 to 80, seem to be the most popular in terms of, we're not on in reruns, because frankly, a lot of our stuff is still too dirty for TV today. Dirty is a silly word, perhaps, but outrageous, a little too sexual. So yeah, they're not in reruns, but from those outrageous game show moments or the best, funniest game show answers of all time, they use many of our clips, and they're all over YouTube, and yeah, and they were funny, and we just lucked out. So Newlywed Game, we had fun. It was, I won't say it was a breeze, because I was not good at writing Newlywed Game questions. Again, I fashioned myself a writer, but I was a fiction writer. And whereas I could write I'd never been married, but I could write the less newlywed oriented questions, like the,
Such as?
in your neighborhood, Joshua, and again, we're talking about your specific neighborhood, does the sun rise in the south, west, north, or east? Now remember, we're talking about your neighborhood. And
South, of course.
The south is correct. Yeah. And again, Bob was the king. If Bob didn't do it, I don't know who else could do it that quick, could facilitate it that well, because the kinds of questions we would ask, if we got the answer that we wanted, or a great answer, like again, we did get south, Bob would not stop. Bob would go as fast as he possibly could. And even when the husbands came back, if somebody gave, say, the south answer, you wouldn't want them, oh, come on, honey, the sun rises in the east, because that would give the answer away. So Bob would purposely talk over them. Perfect example was, ladies, what does your husband like to dip his crawler in? Okay, girl didn't know what a crawler is. They would say everything from me to potato chips, but they didn't know, and then the guy comes out and says, well, I know what a crawler is. And Bob would, and again, Bob was the best at this, and that's why Bob could still do the show today. Bob would have to literally talk over the guy. You know what a crawler is? It's a kind of dog.
What do you dip it in?
While he's doing that, Bob, Judy, he would move on. And again, Bob was producing the show as host. I mean, we all worked very well together, and that worked well because I would do 2 more shows with Bob. So what am I leaving out?
Any memorable, I know that you've talked about the bloopers and all that stuff, but any one particular couple or any one particular moment from Newlywed Game specifically stand out?
Well, first off, the oldyweds, as we called them, were always the best, meaning the older couples that had been married maybe once, twice, 3 times, whatever, if they were in the 60s or 70s, they always played better. They always, I'm not going to, everybody knows the closet queen answer, on one of our shows, your husband is a closet what? And this one woman, held up closet queen, and that's on about 100 blooper, that's all over the internet. But specifically, for me personally, again, I was known at this point. I forget what season it was, but again, I was flirting with the girls, and I would flirt with them on stage. So Bob asked a question. Again, remember, I'm in the isolation booth. I can't hear a thing. Gentlemen, right now, your wives are off stage with David Greenfield. David, he was out there, crazy guy. Okay, when your wives come back, will they say David did or did not flirt with them? And they're, thank you. You've seen the show, yes. Did David, antiquated saying, did David get fresh with your wives? And the guys, not being clear, say, well, a couple of guys, well, I'd give it a shot. Couple of guys say, no, I didn't see him. Says, no, you don't understand. They're backstage now. Oh, really? He's, and Bob would say, okay, just remember, you're going to the isolation booth with Bob next, with David rather next. So, that stood out as me being the only staff member to be a question on the Newlywed Game. But yeah, all in all, of course, you know, the in the ass answer stood out, but not more so. I mean, that's probably the most famous when people think about the Newlywed Game and they think about the most outrageous answer. What's the weirdest place you ever thought about making love? And the girl says, in the ass. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Bob, a couple of years later, he didn't remember, he didn't believe that that was on. I did remember. We never argued, but we discussed it, and I got back at him later on, which I'll tell you about. But yeah, you know, that's how relaxed they were, because I was always there with them. Again, I told you I was between camera 2 and 3, which again, I'm about 10 feet away from the couples, and you know, I give them thumbs up, or you know, keep talking. By the way, there was one thing I would always do in the briefing, and this got them talking, and I don't know why. I stole it from Soupy Sales. I said, when you go up there, you know, argue, and I go, rah, 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 rah. There's nothing
Literally,
funny
literally making those sounds.
literally making those sounds. And I did it once, and they started laughing, and then I started doing it more often, and I did it a lot because for some reason, and this was towards the end of the briefing, I'm talking about the office briefing, but even when we came down to the studio, you know, rah, 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 and that got him going. It helped. And again, the more, you know, during the briefings, the more I would talk about my personal life, you know, and I'd make up stuff, you know, oh yeah, you know, I was with this girl last night. Oh my God. Again, by me talking about my either sex life or relationships or whatever, they felt more comfortable talking about their relationships, because again, they've never been on TV. And the most important thing I can say, you know, for anybody that's going to produce any kind of relationship show is you got to bond with these people and make them your friend. I mean, all these people really, truly believe, you know, I was like a buddy of theirs, and, you know, that we hung out together, and we did to some extent. And yeah, it was just great. But that was first season.